What's up, guys? We still have a little bit of a topwater window left this fall, and Jeff and I were talking and we decided that it would be a smart idea to do another quick topwater video and talk about common mistakes that we are addressing constantly on a daily basis here in the shop or out on guide trips with our staff. So today's video is all about the top 4 most common topwater mistakes that we see, so that hopefully we can bring them to light. You guys can skip making those mistakes and we can all catch more fish while we still have some topwater season left. So if you'd like to join us in on the convo, let's do it. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of Megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Deps, Lucky Craft, Jackal, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of Megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of Megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard to find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com. Welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with Hookup Tackle, the Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being joined by my buddy Jeffrey the King. Jeff, good morning, sir.
How's it going?
We're the Hookup Tackle USA. Today we are talking about 4 common topwater mistakes that we see anglers make a lot with topwater baits. And this is kind of across the board, all the way from beginning anglers. So if you're just getting into bass fishing, you're just starting to experiment with some of these different topwater baits, some of these mistakes you're gonna find yourself making. And the hope of doing a video like this is to prevent some of those from happening. All the way to like super experienced anglers. I find myself making some of these mistakes on a constant basis, and I have to remind myself about what we're going to talk about. Okay, so this is just an open conversation. These are things that we're addressing on a daily basis. We're seeing ourselves make out on the water. We're seeing some of our guide customers make on the water. So the idea is just to share information so that everybody can maximize their topwater fishing, catch as many fish as we can. You ready for this, Jeff?
Let's see what you got.
And please throw your input in. I know you're not really like, topwater's too much fun for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I know you try to avoid that at all costs so you can stay with a swim bait down in 30 feet, crawling on the bottom.
That's it.
Right. But, you know, if you have anything to add, for some reason people like to hear from you.
Oh, that's
so
terrible.
Throw it out there, okay? All right, so I have a walking bait in my hand, so let's start with walking baits, because I think when people think topwater, that's generally what everybody thinks. Now, we're going to talk about 4 mistakes today. We could go on this topic for hours, because every single type of topwater has things that are important to do and things that are important not to do with it. So, you know, if we don't talk about your favorite type of topwater or whatever, don't stress. We have a couple other topwater baits that we talked about this morning that we're going to do full videos, kind of standalone videos on, things like frogs and that kind of stuff, right? But today we're going to make this kind of a general topwater. So let's start here with walking baits, okay? So one of the biggest things that we see with a walking bait, especially in the beginning, especially when you're just learning, is that a lot of anglers take these and they just tie them straight on. Okay, now there are some baits, depending on which bait you get, there are some baits that you can do that on. Some baits you can just take out of the package, tie on, and go. But there are other baits that need some type of pivot point. Okay, so I'm going to take my absolute favorite. If I could only have one topwater bait in the entire world, this is the one. This is the Teckel Kicknocker. This is my favorite bait. You'll notice that at the front of that bait, there is no split ring, there's no snap, there's no nothing, right? It's just the line tie. Now, a lot of anglers will tie directly to this line tie, and the bait is still going to walk, but it takes a tremendous more, it takes effort and precision at a higher level than if you had some type of pivot point. So if you have a walking topwater bait like this that is missing some kind of pivot point, by merely adding a split ring or a snap, you are going to increase your enjoyment of this lure 100%. Okay, and what that does is when you look at how a walking topwater bait moves, the idea of this bait, if you were to cast this and just wind it in, the bait's just going to kind of go straight in. It doesn't have any built-in or inherent action to it, right? So this is a bait that you, as the angler, you're putting in all the motion, you're putting in all the movement. So every time you're twitching that rod, you're wanting this bait to move back and forth. You're wanting it to walk the dog, right? So what happens is that line is straight at one point, and then you pop it, and when you pull it, the line then kind of gets this little kind of curve to it, and then it goes back. And then when you pull that again, that curve straightens out and it pulls it back this way. And then same thing, you get this little curve and then line, and when you pull it, it pulls it back, and so on and so forth, right? Well, by giving it some kind of pivot point, by creating a split ring or a snap there, it basically just allows that line tie to pivot, right? So when you're pulling on the rod, it's pulling the split ring and it's allowing that bait to pivot freely. So you're getting these much more exaggerated movements side to side. It moves with a lot more ease. If you eliminate that, then you're just kind of pulling it, and as it pulls, it just kind of goes not quite as far, right? So make sure that whichever you're using one of these. Now, I'm a huge fan of split rings. I prefer a split ring a million times over a snap. I don't like snaps, but we sell more snaps than split rings. So if you're a lazy bum like Jeff, right? Do you use snaps, Jeff?
I do use snaps.
Perfect. Nope, that's it. I don't need to hear anything else. So if you're a lazy bum like Jeff, then you could do a snap because they're nice and easy. You can open it up and slide the bait on. But if you take 3 seconds longer and use a split ring, what's nice about a split ring is there's no risk of them opening up, right? So put one of those two on. Now, if you have neither and you're at the lake and you're like, shit, I have nothing to create a pivot, you can always tie a loop knot, right? And you can Google, there's a 9 million different loop knots. You can create a loop knot in your line, and that will do the same thing. But make sure whatever you do, you have some type of pivot point. Not having one is mistake number one. All right, mistake number two that we see is anglers using the incorrect line, okay? Now, we talk about line and we talk about rods a lot here, and we say the same thing all the time. Your rod, your reel, your line is all one system. It all has to work together with you, right? And what's perfect for me may not be perfect for Jeff, may not be perfect for you, and vice versa, right? So a lot of this comes down to the distance you're casting, how you're walking your bait, your hook set. There's so many variables that go into it, right? But line is going to have inherent properties to it, right? So fluorocarbon, for instance, is always going to be kind of a neutral density line that's going to have a slow sink property to it. Mono is always going to pretty much have some stretch to it, right? So each line has properties that you can use to your advantage or can be a disadvantage if you're not paying attention to what's happening, right? So let's talk about line really quick. So the three most common lines obviously here are mono, fluoro, and braid, right? So those are the three we're going to talk about. Now, when we talk about topwater, most people think, okay, I need mono, okay? And the reason for that, if you have your rod spooled completely with fluorocarbon and you're throwing a walking topwater bait, what's going to happen is if I make a 100-foot cast, that fluorocarbon, being neutral density, is going to slowly start to kind of sink down, right? So the belly of your line, here's me, right? I made this beautiful cast, right, to here. Here's my lure. Don't look at me like that, Jeff. Okay? No snap, split ring, not being a bum, right? Throw over to here, okay? This line, instead of being super flat on the surface, is going to start getting this little belly. It's going to start sinking a little bit down. And as you're walking, the line is actually kind of going like this, and it's pulling your topwater bait down. So at the very front of your cast, you'll be able to walk it a little bit, and you'll notice, 10, 12, 15 feet in, that each time you twitch, your bait's actually diving under the water. And that's because the line is pulling it down, okay? So that's why we don't throw straight fluorocarbon on a bait like this, on a walking style bait. Now you could throw straight fluorocarbon on something like a plopper or a buzzbait, something that has more of a steady retrieve where the line never really has a chance to sink down and lay still. That's no problem. But when we're talking about a bait like a popper or a walking bait where there's going to be some pauses and a little bit slower movement and that kind of stuff, then it's really critically important that we not use straight fluoro. Now, what are the options if we don't want to do straight fluoro? Can we do straight mono? Yes. So straight mono is another great option that we can do. So if you guys want to go with a straight mono is a great option for topwater. Now, you have to know that if you get into a straight mono, that mono by its nature is going to have a lot more stretch to it. Okay, so it is going to have a floating property. It's going to float high, it's going to keep that bait high, but it's also going to have some inherent stretch. So depending on your rod, this might be a great idea or it might be a terrible idea. So if your rod is a little bit softer, right, then you're going to have give in your rod and give in your line. So everything is just kind of stretchy and givey. And if you're making a really long cast, you're going to find that you're not going to penetrate the fish on your hook set as well as you would with like a fluorocarbon, right? Now, on the flip side, if your rod is really stiff, if it's really fast, by going to a stretchier mono, you can kind of forgive that fastness a little bit, right? So it may work to your advantage. Now, there's a 9 gazillion different types of mono out there. Sunline even makes one called Defier Armilo, where they've taken the stretch out of it. So it's a mono that is as close to a no stretch as you can get. So it's designed to perform like a fluorocarbon would, but still a mono, right? The downside to doing this is that it becomes very stiff. So you're gonna get more coils in it, you're gonna need to manage it a little bit better. One of the greatest things about mono is it's super easy to manage because it's so soft, right? But here's another little tip if you decide to go straight mono. You can get mono in all kinds of sizes, right? 8 pound, 10 pound, 12 pound, all the way to, 9 million pound, probably. The heavier the line you go, the higher that line's gonna float. The thinner of line you go, the further the distance you're gonna get out of your cast and the easier it's gonna cast. So you're gonna have to figure out which one is more important to you. If you're trying to maximize your casting distance, you're gonna be better off going with like a 12 pound or a 14 pound. But if you're trying to maximize the float, then you're better off going with like an 18 pound or a 20 pound. I use 19 pound if I'm going straight mono. I very rarely go straight mono, but if I am, I'm doing like 19 or 20 pound, 22, something on the higher end, because usually if I'm going straight mono, it's more close range. Okay, it's maybe I'm skipping underneath a dock. It's something more accurate where I don't want a leader knot. I want to just have it nice and smooth through my guides, and I want that little bit of extra give in the line in case I set the hook too hard, in case I slackline hook set, anything like that. It forgives a little bit more, right? So in those instances, that's when I'll go to mono. But the other option with line is to go with braid, okay? And I would say that probably 90% of my topwater fishing is done here. Now, if you hang out in this channel long enough, you'll know that I'm not a huge fan of braid for most things. Topwater fishing is one of those things that I am actually a fan of braid on. Now, you're gonna have to decide if you wanna go straight braid or if you wanna go braid to leader, okay? So, one of the reasons why I like braid is it has no stretch to it. And most of the time that we're fishing topwater out here, remember we're fishing kind of cleaner bodies of water, good water visibility. We're making long casts, right? So if I take something like a Kicknocker, right, and I bomb this thing 200 or 300 feet away from me, and I twitch it once or twice and the fish blow up on it, braid is really the only line that allows me to actually set the hook and feel the hook sink into the fish. If I was gonna try to do that with mono, you're talking about hundreds of feet of stretch. It's never gonna get into the fish. And the biggest reason we lose fish is the hook didn't penetrate properly, right? So braid allows me to get that hook to penetrate correctly. If you guys are fishing around aquatic vegetation, something like that, braid's also gonna be a great option because of the fish digs. It's gonna help you kind of cut through some of that grass and you'll land more fish. Now, you have to be careful with braid too, because braid now, if this was 10 years ago, braid pretty much just came as floating. But nowadays, braid comes as floating, it comes as sinking, it comes as neutral density where it sinks like a fluorocarbon. So there's all kinds of different options on the market. So make sure, if you're gonna go this route, make sure that the braid that you choose is actually a floating braid. Now, back to what we kind of talked about with the mono, with the diameter. The thicker the braid, actually the easier to cast here. So it's kind of the opposite of mono, right? So if you remember what I said with mono, the thinner the mono, the easier it is to cast. With braid, I find that the thinner line digs a lot more in my spool. And when I'm topwater fishing, here, let me grab my rod. When you're topwater fishing, there's a lot of exciting shit that hopefully goes down during the day, right? So a lot of times I'm just kind of running the bank, I'm throwing, and then all of a sudden a fish will blow up on bait, or I'll see a bait ball and I'm winding it in and I'm hurrying and I'm going to cast. So a lot of my casts go from smooth and fluid, right? I'm just in a groove, to all of a sudden there's like this panic and a little herky-jerky, and I changed something in my cast stroke. And a lot of times if my braid is too thin, it has a tendency to dig in there, and then boom, it stops and it only goes 30 feet, and I gotta pick the damn thing out, and by the time I get it all lined up, that fish that I was trying to cast to is long gone, right? So I find that the heavier braid casts much better than the lighter braid. So for me, I live over here, I'm like 60, 65, 70. So, you know, if you're looking to try something out, I would do something in here. Now, do you go straight braid or do you tie a leader? So this is decisions that you're gonna have to make. If I'm using a treble hook bait or something like this, 100% of the time I use a leader, okay? And the reason for that is not necessarily so much for visibility, but braid by its nature is super soft, right? So when you cast a bait like this, it has all these treble hooks, and you've got this really limp braid on there, what happens is when this flies through the air, it's doing all kinds of things in the air. And even when it lands, it may land and the line might kind of wrap around it like that, and it lands. And if these treble hooks love to hang up in the braid. Because remember, braid is nothing more than a bunch of fibers that are just kind of put together, and those hooks can penetrate those fibers really easily. And then it just sucks, because then you got to cut it off, you got to cut your braid out, you got to retie, right? So merely by putting on a 1.5 or 2 foot leader from your braid to your topwater bait, you eliminate that line wrapping around the bait. So I would say almost 100% of the time, this is kind of the setup I do. I use a 20 pound or 22 pound fluorocarbon leader. So I would say probably 99% of the time, it's just this right here, 20 pound Sunline Sniper or FC Leader as my leader material. Now, don't worry that it's fluorocarbon, because it's only a couple of feet long. It's not gonna have a chance to sink, okay? It's not the sinking at the bait that's a problem with fluorocarbon, it's the sinking closer to your rod in the belly, midway between you and the lure, okay? Now, if I was gonna make this leader 15 feet or 20 feet for some reason, it's gonna sink, okay? So the reason I'm going short is solely to give myself a little bit of a cushion so that my hooks aren't wrapping around the bait. This thing is going to be moving so fast and so well that I'm not necessarily concerned with them seeing my line. It's solely just from a castability standpoint, so that I know when the bait lands in the water, it's ready to go, okay? All right, so there you go. The line, critical in topwater fishing. Choosing the wrong line, that's the second biggest mistake we see people make. All right, jumping to the third mistake. For me, this is one that I have to constantly remind myself about, and that is sound. Okay, now sound is something that we talk about a lot, almost as like an afterthought. A lot of times when we're talking about topwater, we're talking about colors, right? We're talking about size, talking about matching the hatch or matching the profile. But sound is kind of like the last thing that we discuss. But when topwater seasons are long, like they are at a place like this, I mean, we've been throwing topwater now basically since the end of February, and now we're coming into, you know, early mid-November, and it's still going. You're talking about a 10-month topwater season that they've seen a lot of the same baits. They've heard a lot of the same baits, right? So they don't just magically stop being at their activity level, but sometimes they're used to hearing this, right? They've heard that loud knock over and over and over and over again. And yeah, we were jacking them last week on this, and then we go out this week and we're throwing the same color, same bait, and nothing. And so we think, oh, well, maybe they wanted a little smaller, maybe they wanted a little bit different color. And we try the same bait, maybe in a pup or something transparent. And sometimes that gets us the bite, and that's the difference maker. But sometimes it's all about sound. So don't be afraid to experiment with sound. Don't get stuck on one lure and go out and not catch them and then just write it off as, I'm not eating topwater anymore. I mean, we do that a lot, right? And a lot of times, like a bait like a Kicknocker or shower blows, like something like this is tied on pretty much year round for us. And a lot of times we'll go out and we'll throw the Kicknocker and we'll run, you know, an hour, hour and a half. And if we don't get bit, it's kind of like, oh, they're not eating topwater, right? And it's easy to write it off because we've been catching them so good for so many months on this bait. There's no reason why they didn't eat it today, right? And we'll come in here and then we'll have customers come in and be like, yeah, we jacked them on topwater today. It's like, what the hell? We threw topwater today. What'd you catch them on? And they threw something silent, or they threw something that had a different pitch, okay? So if you're really into topwater, start thinking about how to dissect this down into different sounds, and remember that sound can be a huge trigger for these fish, right? And it's amazing the difference between, you know, you've got this loud kind of knock of a shower blows or a Kicknocker. You could take something like a Gunfish or a Sammy, and you can hear that higher pitch. That higher pitch up there is going to be more like a shad click. And sometimes if they're used to those shad kind of, you know, cracking their backs and moving differently, sometimes that little pitch can be a difference maker. Sometimes if they're totally just overwhelmed with baits, sometimes going totally silent is the answer, right? And this is a bait by Evergreen called the JT. This is an amazing quiet bait, right? So, and you can do the same thing here in poppers, right? So if you're a popper guy, the same thing applies. You know, a lot of times if you're born in Arizona, you're kind of born with this guy in your hand, right? This is a Rio Rico. Everybody here in the state owns a Rio Rico. It's the best popper in the world. But it has a very distinct sound to it. When you pull it, it's got a real low pitch, like almost like a bass sound to it. And most of the time, it drives fish absolutely fucking crazy. But if you have 500 people a week throwing Ricos over the same fish, there's only so many booms they're gonna listen to before they go, fuck that, I'm not eating it anymore, right? So a lot of times they haven't stopped eating a popper, they've just stopped eating that popper, right? So you could go to something like an Evergreen OB. It's a little bit higher pitch, right? Got a different sound out of it. You could go to something like a Megabass Pop Max that's gonna give you a little shallower pop. So instead of a boom bass, it's more of a true kind of gurgle, and it also walks. You could go to a Deps Pulse Cod. The Deps has this internal spring-loaded weight, okay? So there's not really a true weight inside. You can hear it's relatively silent, but when you pop it, it's got a spring-loaded weight in the head. So every time you move it, it's gonna get a, but then it's quiet after that, right? And it's vibrating in there. So sometimes just that little bit of sound difference makes a huge difference in getting bit. So you guys know, if you've hung out here, color is super critical for me. So first things first, I'm changing color. Then I'm probably changing size. And then if I'm just convinced that those fish should be eating topwater and I'm not getting the bites, I'm seeing bait, I'm seeing birds, I'm seeing fish that are aggressive, then sound becomes a critical element. And there are times when if you're not throwing quiet or silent, you're not gonna get bit, right? So try that. That should hopefully extend your topwater season for you guys. Sound, number 3 thing that we see people do. All right, number 4, we're gonna talk about buzzbaits real quick. So buzzbait is a staple around here. Hopefully it's a staple where you guys are too, because it's one of the most fun ways to catch them on topwater. Now, a lot like what we talked about with sound, a lot of times we will get in ruts with these things. I know that I'm super guilty of being in a buzzbait rut. And what I mean by that is, you know, you got to start somewhere, right? You got to, there's a lot of great buzzbaits, right? Evergreen makes an amazing buzzbait. Jackal makes a great buzzbait. Megabass makes it, right? There's so many great buzzbaits on the market. You got to pick one and start, right? So a lot of times my starting point is this guy, Jamaica Boa. Doesn't matter what your starting point is, whatever you like is great. What happens is out here, a lot of times the fish are keyed in on shad, and so we naturally think, okay, let's throw a white or something, you know, shaddy type color, right? And we throw it around and we get bit, and they'll bite it for months. 2 months, 3 months, 4 months sometimes. You're catching them on the same exact thing. It's literally just repeat the day. It's like show up at the lake and hit the rewind and the repeat button, and you throw the same thing and you keep catching them. And then one day you go out and you throw it around and you're making perfect casts and you're putting it right where the fish are, and you can still even see activity and nothing's touching it, right? So a lot of times it's very easy to get into a rut and say, well, they're not eating a buzzbait anymore, let me try a popper, right? Or let me try something different. Same thing that we just talked about with sound and your walking baits, same thing applies here, okay? Now, it could be a sound thing. A lot of times you can change from one buzzbait to the other and get bit. So a lot of times I could go from like the Megabass to the Raid, or the Raid to the Yamamoto, and just that little bit of change, whether it's going slower or faster or louder or quieter, just that little bit can make a big difference. But if you guys don't want to dive down the rabbit hole of 742 million different buzzbaits on hand, right? Here's a couple of really quick tips that I can give you that can improve your buzzbait season if they're not eating it, okay? So a lot of times, if your fish are really keyed in on bait and shad and they're used to seeing a lot of natural colors, right? So you and the other 100 people on the lake are all throwing this kind of, you know, nice whitey, shaddy kind of look. A lot of times, simply by going to the complete opposite, you're gonna get the bite. And I know that sounds crazy, but a lot of times we'll throw a bright pink, a fire tiger, just something that makes no sense, but the fish are still there, right? The fish are still in the same area, they're still aggressive, they still wanna eat. So sometimes just giving them a different option makes a huge, huge difference here as far as color or sound. Another thing you can do is a lot of times we get stuck in a rut of throwing the buzzbaits how they come out of the package. Let me take this off real quick. Now, another little tip that you can do is sometimes when they stop eating the buzzbaits like this, just take the skirt off, okay? So I'm gonna tear this skirt off. So there we go, I've just taken the skirt off. Did I get glitter all over you?
Oh no.
I feel like I've been at a strip club all night. I wasn't, Kelly. Right, Jeff?
Yeah.
You were there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here you go. Here's your buzzbait with no skirt. Merely by doing this, now we can attach a soft plastic swim bait to it. Now you can do a toad. A lot of guys use like a horny toad. Probably the most popular thing for us around this shop is just put a Keitech on the back of it. So usually for me, a 4.3 is a great starting point. I love the 4.3. I love the 4.8. You could go down to a 3.8 if you want, but the 4.3 and 4.8 are kind of the easiest sizes to do this on. And all you're gonna do here is you're just gonna thread it on just like you would any other, you know, swim bait jig head. You're just gonna thread it a little higher than normal, okay? Make sure it comes out straight, okay? And then you're going to push that up and over that weight that's on that shank. And if you're concerned with it, if you're skipping it, if you're throwing in some nasty shit, you could hit some super glue on there, and that's fine, okay? But now you've totally changed the look of the bait, okay? So now instead of just the skirt, now you actually have the swim bait back there kicking. What's also cool about this is you can take one buzzbait like this, right? You can identify the color of blade that they're eating. Maybe it's silver, maybe it's gold, maybe it's black, whatever, right? And you can merely just mix and match the colors of the bait. So if they're eating white one day and all of a sudden they're not eating white, they want something more natural, you can go with a natural color. Maybe they want something with a little pop like we talked about earlier, you could throw over to a chartreuse. Maybe it's spring and they're keyed in on like fire craw chatterbaits and that kind of stuff. Maybe you could mix in a fire craw. So you can take one buzzbait and essentially make it any color that you want to make it. By going to a swim bait, you also give the fish something legit and solid if they're kind of sucking, right? So if they're just absolutely attacking at full speed and you can see them coming full send to your buzzbait, there's nothing like the skirted buzzbait. I think they attack that the best. But when they're kind of just sucking, you're just seeing swirls go, having a soft plastic trail like this is really a smart idea because it's giving them some actual body to suck in and pull into their mouth when they're doing it. So there you go. There is number 4. Don't get stuck in a rut with your buzzbait fishing. Try those and you will definitely catch more. All right, guys, that is a wrap. Those are 4 mistakes that we see guys make all the time. If you guys have found yourself making maybe a different mistake than what we just covered, drop it down below. We would love to just collectively share as a group so we can all learn from each other. If you've made mistakes and found fixes for them, share them. Let us all learn from you. If you have questions on anything that we've covered, drop it down below as well, and I will definitely get answers for you as well. Guys, on behalf of myself and Jeff and everybody here at the Hookup Tackle, thank you for giving us time to watch this video. Thank you for your business. We will see you again soon. Good luck with your topwater fishing, my friends. Peace out. See you soon.